Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. This week we are all about Spa, and I'm not talking about a massage and a mani-pedi. We are talking about the Belgium Grand Prix at the legendary Spa-Francorchamps. On today's episode, we'll have a brief history of the Grand Prix. Corey will once again scramble my brain with his pundit stumping trivia. We'll talk about the results from this weekend's Grand Prix and all the latest driver news. So buckle up, so grab a waffle and some Trappist beer and settle in. It's going to be a good one. This is F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, welcome back to F1 Brake Check. I am Scott Vick, one of your hosts. With me, as always, is my brother in arms, my ride or die, my pundit for life, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing this week, sir?
It's been busy. It's been another one of those busy weeks, man. It's just meeting after meeting and then another meeting after that. So it's been a fight just to stand up sometimes, literally. You know, it's just back to back, which is part of the life that we now have working remotely. So but other than that, man, it's been pretty good. How about you?
It's a lot of the same. It's been a couple of very late nights this week so far, running down problems and trying to figure out stuff and things like that for work. Right. And it's just been it's been frustrating and, you know, exhausting.
I hear you. Definitely hear you.
Yeah. Let's get into the history of Spa. Les Combs, La Source, Raidillon, Kimmel, Eau Rouge. The names evoke images of some of the greatest corners and straights in all of Grand Prix racing. They can only mean one place, Spa-Francorchamps. They can mean only one race, the Belgium Grand Prix. The first Belgium Grand Prix took place on June 28, 1925, at the original 14.9 kilometer or 9.3 mile circuit layout, which ran through the public roads of the Ardennes region. The original circuit was a daunting test of driver skill and bravery, featuring long straights, high-speed corners, and minimal safety features. Over the years, the Spa-Francorchamps circuit underwent numerous changes to improve safety and adapt to the evolving demands of motorsport. In 1979, when the circuit was shortened to its current length of 7 kilometers or 4.3 miles, the new layout retained the essence of the old track while introducing modern safety standards. It is home to one of the most iconic corner sequences in the world, Eau Rouge and Raidillon, which lead into the long and blindingly fast Kimmel Straight. This sequence of corners and straights were referred to by the late Ayrton Senna as the reason I do F1. Adding to the mystique are the fast sweeping corners and straights that make Spa one of the fastest tracks on the calendar. Throughout its history, the Belgium Grand Prix has been the setting of numerous thrilling races. Who could forget the rain-soaked chaos of the 1998 Grand Prix? Torrential rain created treacherous conditions, leading to a massive multi-car pileup at the start involving 13 cars, including a number of the title contenders and midfield runners. The race was red flagged and restarted, but more incidents followed. In this time period, backup cars were still allowed by the rules, and several of the drivers were able to take the restart. But 4 drivers who did not have a backup car available to them were out at the beginning. Damon Hill, driving for the underdog Jordan team, managed to stay out of trouble and took the lead of the race on the restart. On lap 8, Michael Schumacher passed Hill and proceeded to build up a 30-second lead. However, on lap 24, Michael Schumacher, attempting to pass a slowing David Coulthard, collided with the McLaren, destroying Schumacher's Ferrari. Despite the chaos and multiple safety car periods, Hill, having reclaimed the lead, held on to take Jordan's first ever victory, with his teammate Ralf Schumacher finishing second. In recent years, Spa has continued to produce exciting moments, and the race has also become a crucial battleground in the championship fight, often serving as a turning point in the season. The Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps remains one of the most beloved and revered races on the Formula One calendar. The circuit's combination of high-speed, challenging corners, and unpredictable weather keeps drivers and teams always on their toes. Its rich history has cemented its place as a jewel in the crown of motorsport. Yeah. I know we talked about this when we talked about Silverstone being on the bucket list. Spa is also one of those iconic tracks that just, when everyone thinks of Formula One, most everyone thinks of Spa. And it's definitely right up there with Silverstone as one of my bucket list places to see. Your thoughts on Spa in general?
Definitely one of the greats out there that we have. It's such a fast track. It's technical. There's lots of action. As you've already stated in the history, it's so fun to watch. Have you ever driven it even in the sim?
Yeah, I've driven it in the sim in a couple of different games and stuff, and
Yeah.
it is just one of those just phenomenal tracks. It's
Yeah.
one of those Eau Rouge,
Yeah.
Radillon, into the Kimmel Strait is just when you can nail it, even in the simulator, it is just one of the best feelings because it is so hard to take that corner at speed, but when you get the braking just right, get on the throttle just right, up the hill, you're blindingly fast, and and then you go down the Kimmel Strait, and then you slam on the brakes, go into the next series of corners and everything, and it's just phenomenal. It's one that if I ever get the chance to drive it in real life,
Oh yeah,
I
no doubt
can't
about it.
wait. I would
Yeah.
love to do it. But even just getting to witness a Grand Prix at Spa, because like I said in the history, it's one of those races that rain almost it's just like Silverstone, that rain
Right.
almost always figures into the race at some point.
Right. Yeah, it's a guarantee. Just
Yeah,
no win. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I first got into Formula One and became a fan,
Mhm.
Spa was one of those first tracks that really captured my imagination simply because it was, at that time, it was one of the longest tracks on the calendar. And coming from having a cursory knowledge of the sport and everything to suddenly go, oh, wait a minute, this track is long compared to a lot of the other ones and everything.
Yeah. Like you said, it's one of those tracks that it's a great track because people can name the corners, they can name certain aspects of the track and understand exactly where you're talking about. Just like
Yeah.
Silverstone, I always use that as my guidepost, so to speak, on how great a track is. If people can talk about and know parts of the track, then you know that it's going to be a great track, or at least it's going to be a historical track.
Yes, absolutely. And Spa is definitely one of those. I mean, it's like,
Mhm.
even, you just say the bus stop chicane, and suddenly, and people are like, oh, I know you're talking about Spa. One of those funny stories that how the name, because Spa, up until even maybe about a decade ago now, parts of the track were still used as public roads during the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And they're literally the bus stop chicane. That's how it got its name, because there literally used to be a bus stop right there.
Yep, exactly.
The Tech Corner has already gone on a holiday, but we'll be back next week with another fascinating deep dive. So instead, we're going to go straight into Stump the Pundit, which is, as we've learned, is become one of my favorite sections of this podcast. So Corey, what do you have for me this week?
I have a few, all over the board, so we're not focusing on one specific person or team. Which Formula One team has the most races won at Monaco?
Oh, at Monaco, I'm going to say it's McLaren
Yes,
or Lotus. One of the two. Which one?
McLaren. It's
It is
McLaren.
McLaren. Okay.
How many wins?
I want to say 9.
No, it's 15.
No.
If you can believe that.
Really?
Yeah, I know.
Wow, 15. That's incredible.
I know. Which driver holds the record for the most pole positions in a single season?
Most pole positions in a single season. Okay, I'm gonna go. I know that Nigel Mansell had that record at one point, but I think he's been surpassed. So I want to say it's either Max or Lewis have the record now for the most pole positions in a season.
It's actually Sebastian Vettel.
Really?
15 pole positions in 2011.
Wow. And that was back when I think there was only 18 or 19 races back in
Right.
2011.
Yeah, he almost got every single one exactly.
Yeah. And people talk about Max's dominance
I
in
know.
winning them last year. So
Right. But if you remember, he would at that time, Sebastian was just murdered.
oh yeah.
It's kind of like Max was too.
Yeah.
People
Well,
didn't
yeah, the Red
appreciate
Bull
him
that
until
year.
after. Yeah.
Yeah, the Red Bull that year was also, that was another year where the Red Bull was just, it was really, they had a couple of mechanical issues that kept him from, there was a couple times where, if I remember correctly, Sebastian was even leading several races when he dropped out because of mechanical issues and everything.
Yeah.
So that year, the car was just lights out better than everybody else. It's just that they got caught out by a few more mechanical issues
Sure.
than Max did last year with his
Right.
record-breaking season.
Yeah, exactly. So, who is the only driver to win a championship with Ferrari and then turn around and become the team principal?
Okay, so I'm trying to think of everyone who's won championship at Ferrari. I'm not sure. I'm going to say it's probably one of the drivers that won it for them in the 60s or 70s.
Niki Lauda.
Niki Lauda. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I always forget that Lauda hit the championship and then later on became the team principal, before John Todt took over years later.
Which driver has the most Grand Prix starts without winning a race? Not consecutive, but in total.
In total. I want to go with John Lacey, but I don't think that's right.
Andre de Cesaris with 208 starts.
Wow.
No wins.
Yeah. I know Lacey was up there in that area, but I know that he did have one win. He had one win in his entire F1 career. So that's kind of why I went with the Lacey, because he had quite a long career, but he was never always a bridesmaid, never a bride, or only a bride once.
Right, exactly. And that's really it for Stump the Pundit.
All right, so let's get into this recapping this weekend and all the action from Spa. First off, we have to talk about our winner, our pseudo winner, and Mercedes in general. So Mercedes took and had a fantastic 1-2 this weekend that was kind of unexpected. After free practice and after qualifying, I really didn't think that Mercedes was going to have much of a shot unless the front runners had some kind of bobble or something. But I was absolutely shocked that Mercedes took and had a absolutely brilliant strategy with George Russell and only did a one-stop race. So he ended up running the last 3/4 of the race on the same set of hard tires, which was just phenomenal, which gave him a fantastic win. And then Lewis on a 2-stop strategy, though, but on seriously good pace and perfect timing of the pit stop by the Mercedes team, comes home in second place, which was just outstanding. But then, unfortunately, George gets disqualified because the car is 1.5 kilograms underweight. That's how much underweight he was. So, first off, Corey, your thoughts on the win and the strategy, and then on the disqualification.
Mercedes is just killing it. It's amazing. They just turned that corner and all of a sudden it's just everything is just falling into their lap. Their strategy, they're calling correctly every single time. The car's looking great. The drivers are comfortable inside of the car. And one of the things I was thinking about is as more and more wins and more times that they are up front, I'm starting to think, well, I wonder if Lewis is starting to regret that move. Because early on in the season, we were thinking, well, yeah, that makes complete sense. Mercedes is, midfield at best. They're not doing great. The car isn't looking good, and it completely makes sense. And then the last 3 or 4 races, they have turned it around. I wonder if he's thinking in the back of his head, man, if I would have stayed here, what if? Because now Ferrari is not looking great.
Yeah.
Whereas at the beginning of the season, Ferrari was very competitive.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, you have to kind of wonder if Lewis is kind of thinking that maybe in the back of his head. I don't think it's going to change anything.
But, the disqualification, that to me is just really bad management on Mercedes. There's people that they go around and make sure that the car is up to spec, that it's at weight. That's 100% on Mercedes.
Yes, I will agree. Because I agree because there's been a lot of speculation about how the car came home underweight. And I think there was several factors that played into it. The speculation online has been said, it's because they switched from all their calculations and everything, because a lot of people don't know this, but all of the teams, the engineers, they have calculated out how much in fluids, between fuel and oil and other things, what they refer to as consumables, that the car will lose over the course of of the race. And when they're in free practice, part of what they're doing in free practice is they're running race simulations where the driver will go out and he'll do 8 or 10 laps at racing speed. And then they'll come back and they'll look at all the data after the practice, after he's run the program. They'll look at all that data. Well, people speculated, well, because they switched from, probably they had it planned that they were going to do a 2-stop. Judging by the radio transmissions and everything, that's exactly what they did. Is they originally had planned to do a 2-stop race and then changed their strategy to do a 1-stop race. So they had less material on the tire because they used the tire for much longer than what they initially had anticipated and probably calculated for. But the problem is, though, is that the FIA does allow the team to put a different set of tires on it. They declined to do that, and they took the disqualification probably because they knew that there was something else that even if they had put on a different set of tires, it was not going to make up a big enough difference. And the other thing, too, is that one of the things that you'll notice that the drivers will do is after the race on the cool down lap, they will take and drive offline so that they can pick up as much of what they refer to as the clag, which is the marbles and everything that are all offline. They'll try to pick that up on the tires to add a little bit of additional weight to make sure that they make the minimum weight during post-race tech inspection. And at Spa, because it's such a long lap, they don't allow them to do that. That's one of the only tracks that they don't do that at. They don't do a cool down lap. They literally will go down to the end of the straight to the hairpin, turn the car around, and then come back down the pit lane in reverse. People speculate, well, it's because he didn't get to pick up the clag. And no, it's the same thing, that even if he had been able to do that, I still don't think he would have made weight. I have a sneaking suspicion that it was some of the other consumables and things like that they had anticipated that the car would still have. You know, I think it boiled down to is they made a miscalculation. Mercedes knew, and that's the reason why they haven't protested and they didn't put a different set of tires on it, thinking that maybe, well, it was the extra wear on the tires is what caused it to be underweight. No, somebody made a miscalculation and Mercedes just took it on the chin. With that, Lewis takes and gets another win. So this now makes 2 wins in 3 races, which, 2 wins and a podium in 3 races. So like you said, Mercedes has definitely pouring it on right now. And they've definitely had the run of good luck at the moment, especially for Hamilton's. So with Hamilton's elevation to the race win, that took and elevated Oscar from 3rd on the podium up to 2nd place. And at the end of the race, Oscar was he was 0.6 of a second behind Lewis at the end of the race. And had it not been for the bad pit stop on Oscar's 2nd stop where he overshot the pit box, there's a very good chance that Oscar could have finished 2nd and then wound up with a back-to-back win. And then Lando took and had another mistake during the race, and which kept him kind of stuck behind Max. McLaren had another really, really good weekend. It's just, again, these little tiny mistakes that now that they're making that Mercedes isn't.
Yeah. And Lando keeps getting further and further behind. So now where Max was starting to look like he's within reach, unless Max has several DNFs, it's going to be really difficult for him to be caught.
Yes, I agree. As far as like, I think we even talked about this last week during the podcast. I think Max built up a big enough lead. And as long as he still continues to perform well enough to score points, I don't think anybody's going to be able to catch him, like you said, unless he has, a really bad run of DNFs or, he gets injured or something, knock on wood that he doesn't. Yeah, I don't see anybody being able. But the thing is, though, is that this weekend, McLaren took another huge chunk out of their deficit to Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. And they went from 60-something points behind Red Bull to being only 40-something points now. I think 46 points behind Red Bull now. Speaking of Red Bull, we have to talk about their strength in Max's brilliant pole position and his very solid race despite a 10-place grid penalty for taking a new internal combustion engine this weekend. But we also have to talk about problems that still seem to persist for Checo. Finally has the bounce back that we've been expecting to see from Checo. He ends up qualifying 3rd behind Leclerc's phenomenal display of skill, which we'll get into in just a few minutes. But then he drives an absolutely, well, not absolutely putrid, but he makes too many mistakes and doesn't drive a very good race. And at the very least, what should have been a podium for Red Bull, and he ends up finishing in 8th place. Checo is becoming one of those great frustrations in Formula One and in talking about him. So
I know Red Bull has a plan with Perez, and I know that they have a lot of weight behind him, but his drive just isn't there. He's able to have just kind of like Danny Rick, and they have put their weight behind Danny Rick as well. So you have these two drivers. Right now, we're just talking about Perez, that he has flashes of where he's really pretty good. I wouldn't say great, but I'd say pretty good. And then you have who I would say is up and coming with Yuki right there in the wings, or at least Lawson. So you have two drivers there that could really do much better. And now, because of the performance of Checo, Red Bull doesn't have their dominance in the constructors anymore. They are very close to losing that top spot. That's going to be millions of dollars that is going to be cost because Checo isn't able to place high enough to exceed what we see of McLaren now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I do have to make a correction. I said that Checo finished 8th this weekend, but he finished in 8th, but then with George's disqualification, he ended up in 7th. But no, I totally agree with you. That's part of the reason. It's because Checo is supposed to be there to be a strong teammate and score consistently week in, week out. Even if Max finishes ahead of both the McLarens, Checo's finishing behind them. And so the pair of McLarens is continuing to take bigger and bigger chunks out of the lead that Red Bull had built up.
Yeah, no longer can they expect Max to always get that top spot anymore, which is really what they relied on last year. Now that's not happening. And because of that, we have both Norris and Piastri outscoring most of the time. They're outscoring. So even if they're not, they're both high enough in points where Checo's points it's not a big deal at all. They can outscore him very easily or outplace him.
Yes, absolutely.
So on to Ferrari.
So again, like we just mentioned, Leclerc had an absolutely brilliant qualifying lap to finish second. And for the second year in a row, he inherits pole for the start of the race due to a grid penalty imposed on Max Verstappen, again, for the exact same thing, for taking a new internal combustion engine before the start of the race. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But at the same time, he had a really phenomenal qualifying. Sainz also looked really good. He only qualified 8th. He struggled with a little bit during qualifying, but most of the weekend, he looked really, really solid. Ferrari have not quite kept up with the McLarens and Mercedes and Red Bulls, but I think we're starting to see them taking a little bit better of a step forward this weekend at Spa. And I think when the summer break is over with, I think that they're going to come back with a renewed vigor, like that's going to be much more in line with what we saw at the beginning of the season.
Well, let's hope so.
So let's move on to Aston Martin. So Stroll has an accident in practice, winds up only qualifying 15th in Q2, drove a pretty solid race, all things considered, ends up getting himself up in just outside of the points at the end with the disqualification, him being elevated. I mean, he finishes 12th, but ends up being classified at 11th. So he just outside of the points. So, not a great weekend for Stroll, but he's looking much more solid, much more racy. And then Alonso makes it into Q3, winds up qualifying 9th, and then starts 8th with the Verstappen grid penalty. He's just kind of there. He ends up losing out one place, finishing 9th, but is classified 8th. So he basically finishes where he started. So he just not a great weekend. I don't know quite what to make of Aston Martin anymore. It's like, are they still kind of can't really say that they're tops of the midfield anymore,
It's too bad because I was really enjoying watching them really starting to improve, especially from last year, and performance just isn't there.
Yeah, unfortunately it isn't. So after the summer break, I kind of expected, my feeling is that we'll see a renewed vigor from Aston Martin as well after the summer break.
Absolutely.
Let's take and talk about Alpine. The Alpine from the absolute, well, let's just call it what it is, debacle at the Hungaroring last weekend to this weekend where they had a much better weekend. Ocon makes it into Q3, finishes and gets some much needed points for the team, qualifies 10th, is elevated to 9th, the grid penalty, and then ends up coming home in the same position, with the disqualification, got two very much needed points. Gasly makes it into Q3, basically finishes where he started as well. So Gasly qualifies 12th and actually ends up finishing 13th. Not a great weekend for Gasly, but, like I said, the departing Ocon looked much better this weekend, especially after the debacle of last weekend.
Small improvement. Had some changes recently, so I can only imagine that's playing into their head as well. So there's probably some morale issues, especially after it was announced about Ocon, and now their technical director is leaving as well. I can only imagine how that's affecting them.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that the turmoil that is still ongoing inside of Alpine played a role in Alpine's lackluster performance this year. Their unevenness over the course of the season. But I think that with, some much needed changes, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. And I think we'll see a lot more consistency out of them. I think will be the name of the game for Alpine going forward for the rest of the season.
All right. Up to Racing Bulls.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, we have to talk about Yuki. Didn't have a great weekend, although most of it was not of his own making. Yuki had to take a completely new power unit, which gave him so many grid penalties that he ended up, no matter what qualified, he was going to start at the back of the field on Sunday. He didn't even make it out of Q1. I think that they were trying to save the car and they were trying to save a couple sets of tires for the race. He fights his way all the way up to 16th place. Not as great of a run as I think that he would have been capable of, but I think because of the grid penalty and the having to take a new power unit, I just don't think that they got enough running and time with the car during practice and qualifying that I think that played a lot into his kind of lackluster showing this weekend.
Yeah.
And then Ricardo makes it into Q2 and he finishes in the points, ahead of his teammate for the second week in a row. Your thoughts?
Again, one of those things that Ricardo, I can't help but wonder, what would Liam Lawson do if he was in that seat? How much more points? It's hard for me to keep thinking about, and Ricardo's there, but surely Racing Bulls could have somebody else in that seat. And again, no slight to Danny Rick is intended here, but surely there's somebody else that could be promoted into that seat where Racing Bulls could actually start chipping away at the constructors. With Yuki, it was a lost race from the very beginning with as many grid penalties as he had.
So let's talk about Williams. Albon starts 11th, just barely misses out on Q3. In the end, he ends up, just outside of the points, finishes 12th. Not as great a weekend as kind of what we were expecting. The Williams is last season and into the first part of this season, it was really in a straight line. It was really one of the fastest cars on the grid. And so with the high speeds at Spa, we were really expecting him to go a lot better.
Yeah, it was really disappointing to see that Williams didn't do better at this track than they did. I was really expecting at least Albon to be in the points, and Sargent is where he is. At least he didn't end up last.
Yes. Talking about Albon, we also have to talk about Sargent, who, the last 2 weekends, he has looked so much better, made it into Q2, and then he kind of took a step back this weekend where, he seemed to be way off the pace in qualifying. And, like you said, he didn't finish last. He did out-qualify Joe Granu, but at the same time, he looked just lost most of the time in qualifying. And then, he only ends up finishing, 17th. So kind of an off weekend for Sargent.
Yep. Yeah, I wonder how much of that plays into him being told basically, hey, you don't have a seat here next year. He probably
Yeah,
expected it, but it's even worse when it actually happened. So maybe that had a drop in his performance.
yeah, and that may very well have led to his his lack of confidence in the car, and maybe he's already got him thinking about plans for next year.
Yep.
Let's finish up talking about Haas and Sauber. Both of them were off the pace, as we really kind of fully expected ahead of time before the weekend even started. Neither team looked great. So I don't know if there's really much we can take and we can talk about them that hasn't already been said this season.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So let's move on to our news. So this week we got the announcement that's like we alluded to during the weekend recap that Sargent is out at Williams and Carlos Sainz, in what, at least for me, was a big surprise, is that he signs a 2-year deal with Williams to join the team next year.
That was a shocker to me. I did not expect Sainz. You and I both were suspecting that he'd go on to Mercedes, but going to Williams, that's an interesting play.
It is.
I would have guessed it.
Obviously, Williams was able to make a case. There's been a lot of speculation of why he signed with Williams, and I kind of tend to agree that I think that the management at Williams has said that, hey, we've got a fantastic driver in Albon. We need a second really, really strong driver, and you fit the bill because we have laid the groundwork. We have all of the bits and pieces in place, and we're laying that groundwork to get ourselves back to the front end of the grid. And I think Sainz saw that and said that, as opposed to Sauber, i.e. Audi, being somewhat of an unknown going into 2026, and seeing how Haas has kind of made some inroads. And we knew that Haas was never, once they signed Ocon, Haas knew that they weren't going to get Sainz. I'm like you. I was really shocked that he did not go to Mercedes.
Yeah.
And it makes me kind of wonder who is going to get that Mercedes seat. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. All right. So with that being said, though, also one of the biggest speculations has been about the performance clause that Checo had in his contract, and the speculation that said that Checo was not going to meet those performance clauses and was therefore going to be out by the summer break, even though they gave him a 2-year contract extension just, a few weeks ago. Yeah. But then we get the announcement that Red Bull has given Checo their vote of confidence, and they have guaranteed that he will be in the Red Bull seat at least until the end of this season.
It's crazy to me.
I agree completely. What options do you think that Red Bull had, though?
Who would they replace Checo with? I mean, just like you've commented in the past, Red Bull tends to take from racing bulls. So that's typically how they're farmed.
Yes.
So that's a perfect place. You slot in Liam Lawson in there, and you have a backup or you have a replacement for Yuki. Yuki slots in. They could test Yuki right now, just like they did Danny Rick when they replaced De Vries last year. Test him out.
Let him see how he does. I would really be interested to see how Yuki would go in a Red Bull right now.
I agree.
Next thing, with the news that Sainz is going to Williams starting with next year, that now puts the second seat at Mercedes in a big old question mark of who is going to take that seat. The speculation was that Mercedes was trying to get Antonelli into that seat. And you and I have discussed at great length that we think that would be a huge mistake. Who do you think is the best candidate now to slot into that second seat at Mercedes?
I'm struggling here. I don't know who would be a good second. Max? Max Verstappen?
It's funny that you say that I just so happened that right before we started recording, and I haven't read the full article, David Coulthard and Eddie Jordan do a podcast over in the UK. They were actually speculating that was saying that now with the lack of performance from Red Bull over the last few races, that they were speculating that now that Sainz has signed with Williams, could we possibly see Max make that decision to finally exercise his escape clause and go to Mercedes for next year, especially with the way that Mercedes is performing right now?
Well, not only that, but how much frustration he is having at Red Bull. Beyond him, I mean, unfortunately, Bottas, there's no way he's going back to Mercedes, so we can rule him out.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah, agreed. I don't really know anybody else that's currently at least on the grid.
In the last couple minutes that we have, let's take and talk about the seats that we still have open. So we still have the seat open at Mercedes. Alpine is one of the few that has a seat left open. We still have Sauber still has a seat open. So we really only have 3 seats open, and we've got 5 drivers that are still on the outside looking in. Of the drivers that are left on the grid, who do you think is the best candidate to actually have a seat come next season?
I mean, definitely K-Mag there's nowhere else on the grid for him. The only one that I can really think of is Bottas. That would have a chance somewhere else. He's a good enough driver. He definitely has the ability to go somewhere else and actually make a big difference. But out of all the other people that are losing their seats, I think he's really the only one that I would say definitely he has a seat next year.
Because the second seat at Sauber is still open. If they can't secure Bottas for next year, now personally myself, I would love to see him go back to Mercedes, but I have a bad feeling that that's not going to happen. You know, if Toto let him go once, I don't see Toto letting him come back, even if they do have that open seat. But where I think it would be really interesting is I really think that him going to and taking that second seat next to Gasly over at Alpine would be super, super interesting.
I agree. That pairing would be phenomenal.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, then. So, like the drivers, mechanics, and supermodel girlfriends, we are bugging out for this week. But unlike the rest of the paddock, we'll be back next week. So join us next time as we'll talk the latest news and rumors. We'll have an all-new tech corner, a fascinating biography of another of F1's all-time greats, more Stump the Pundit trivia, and lots more. So until next time, he's Corey, I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.